So I want you to picture this. It's December 1st, 2018.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. You are standing in Vancouver International Airport, and a woman in a dark, like really comfortable-looking tracksuit steps off a Cathay Pacific flight from Hong Kong.
Just a totally normal arrival.
Exactly. She's just planning this quick stopover at one of her family homes before heading down to Buenos Aires for a G20 summit.
Right.
But as she walks out of Gate 65, she gets intercepted by border officers. They pull her aside, take her luggage, and they just immediately start pulling out all her electronics.
Which is pretty intense right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, there is a pink MacBook, there's a rose gold iPad, an iPhone, and a red case smartphone that's actually made by her father's company.
And what they do next with those devices is key, right?
Yeah, the officers take all of them and they stuff them into these thick, specialized signal-blocking bags.
Right, which tells you immediately that this is not just some random everyday customs check.
No, definitely not.
Those signal-blocking bags, they're used to ensure that the devices basically cannot be remotely wiped or, accessed from the outside by a corporate security team.
Wow. So 3 hours of intense questioning later, she is officially arrested on U.S. fraud charges.
Right.
And that woman was Meng Wanzhou. She's the chief financial officer of Huawei and the eldest daughter of its founder.
The founder himself, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that moment at the airport didn't just kick off this massive international diplomatic crisis.
No, it did a lot more than that.
Right. It essentially forced the entire world to suddenly pay very, very close attention to a company that most people in the West barely understood at all.
Absolutely.
So today our mission for this deep dive is to explore this fascinating stack of excerpts and photographs from Eva Dou's 2025 book, House of Huawei.
And it is just a remarkable piece of journalism, truly.
It is.
And we should probably establish right up front that we're not going to spend our time today just looking at, microchip architecture.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah, or the technical specs of 5G networks, because that's not what this is really about.
No, we are looking at the turbulent and, frankly, just astonishing generational history of the family that actually built this empire.
Yeah, the human element.
Exactly. We are going to trace how a family goes from a world of literal starvation to the absolute pinnacle of global tech dominance.
It's wild. And to really grasp the significance of Huawei, you kind of have to understand its scale.
Right.
And why that sheer scale is so deeply unsettling to the traditional Western worldview. We were basically talking about a modern Sputnik moment.
A Sputnik moment. Wait, how so?
Well,
I mean, I know the Soviet Union launching that satellite in 1957 caused this huge collective existential crisis in America, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But we're talking about a smartphone and telecom company here. It feels a bit different.
It does on the surface, but it's really about the philosophical shock of it all.
Okay, I'm listening.
During the Cold War, the West basically operated on this fundamental assumption that freedom and a free market democracy were prerequisites for true innovation.
Like you needed that freedom to invent things.
Exactly. So when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, they achieved this massive technological leap, but they used a completely different state-controlled model.
Ah, I see.
And Huawei represents that exact same kind of philosophical shock today.
Because they did it without the Silicon Valley playbook.
Right. For decades, the dominant narrative has been that groundbreaking tech requires this very specific ecosystem. The college dropout in the garage.
Yeah, the venture capitalism, the democratic society, all of that.
Exactly. But Huawei became #1 in 5G and smartphones without that Western framework at all.
That makes total sense. And just looking at the numbers from our sources, I mean, the scale is hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Huawei files more patent applications than any other company on Earth, period.
More than anyone.
They employ more people than Apple, and they pull in more annual sales than Disney and Nike combined.
Which is just a staggering amount of influence. And that dominance brings a lot of friction, obviously.
Definitely.
U.S. officials have repeatedly labeled Huawei a national security threat. They cite fears of Chinese government control and potential data backdoors.
Right, the idea that overseas intelligence agencies could burrow into international networks.
Exactly. And it's really worth noting here that Eva Dou's book documents all these intense political claims without taking a side.
Yes, and we should be clear, we aren't taking a side either.
Right. We're impartially exploring these claims just as they appear in the source material. We're not endorsing either viewpoint.
Right, we're just laying out what's in the book. So what does this all mean?
Well,
because Huawei's founder, Ren Zhengfei, actually has a very specific defense against all these espionage fears.
He does.
He claims that Huawei just makes, quote, pipes.
Yeah, the plumber analogy.
Right. He says his company is essentially a hardware store, or like a plumber. And he asks, why would you interrogate a plumber about the water flowing through the pipes?
It is a very clever, folksy kind of deflection.
It really is.
He is basically trying to position this massive multinational tech conglomerate as just a neutral blue-collar utility.
Yeah.
But that analogy completely ignores the mechanics of modern telecommunications.
I totally agree. I actually have to push back on his analogy entirely here.
Oh, fuck.
Because if someone builds your plumbing, they don't just lay the pipes, they drew the blueprints to your house.
Right.
If they really wanted to, they could install a hidden valve to shut off your water entirely or siphon it off before it ever hits your sink.
That's a great point.
And what flows through these pipes isn't water. It is government secrets, it's police intelligence, financial records, and even power grid controls.
Exactly. And the technology itself requires constant maintenance. A 5G network isn't just a static pipe that you install and then walk away from.
Oh, it needs updates.
Right, it requires constant software patches and firmware updates from the manufacturer. So if a foreign government theoretically had leverage over that manufacturer, they wouldn't even need to build a literal physical backdoor into the hardware.
Oh, wow.
They could just mandate a malicious software update that creates a vulnerability overnight.
That's remote.
Yes, that is the underlying mechanism of the fear here.
Which is exactly why the international scrutiny reached this absolute boiling point with his daughter's arrest in Vancouver.
Right.
And what happened in the immediate aftermath of that arrest is just bizarre.
It really took a turn.
Yeah, after Meng's detention, Beijing retaliated by detaining 2 Canadians. So the trade war basically explodes into hostage diplomacy.
Yeah, a huge geopolitical standoff.
And right in the middle of all this intense pressure, Ren Zhengfei does something completely unexpected. He invites the foreign press inside.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Journalists from major Western news organizations were suddenly invited to Huawei's R&D campus in Shenzhen and Dongguan.
Which is a huge deal.
It's massive.
Yep.
Keep in mind, this is a man who had famously shunned the media spotlight for decades. He never gave interviews.
And the scene they walk into, you have to picture this.
Oh, the campus.
Yeah. They drive through the smoggy outskirts of Shenzhen, past these endless seas of gray factories churning out like plastic welders and electric toothbrushes.
Standard industrial park stuff.
Right. And then they arrive at Huawei's 1.2 square kilometer Oxhorn campus.
What's fascinating here is the sheer architectural whiplash of this place.
Whiplash is the perfect word.
You would expect a sleek glass and steel tech hub, right? Something similar to Apple Park in California.
Yeah, giant spaceship or something.
Exactly. But instead, the campus features these life-size replicas of Versailles.
Yeah.
And it has a massive building modeled after Germany's Heidelberg Castle.
It is so surreal. There is literally a little red train that chugs around ferrying employees from castle to castle.
It's unbelievable.
They hired 150 Russian painters to cover the ceilings in Renaissance-style murals.
Wow.
You walk into a hall and there are Greek caryatids. Those massive stone pillars sculpted to look like women holding up the roof.
Yeah, classical architecture.
It is a literal European fantasyland dropped right into the middle of China's factory floor.
And at the center of it all is Ren Zhengfei himself.
Right.
This mastermind that Washington views as a massive global threat, just standing there as a wizened older man in a blue leisure suit, cracking jokes.
It's quite the image.
But the sources highlight one specific detail on that campus that I think reveals so much about his mindset.
Oh, the swans.
Yes. On the lake, in the center of the campus, there are black swans.
He actually brought in real black swans.
Live black swans. And they are there by design.
Wait, why?
Well, in business and economics, a black swan event is a highly unlikely, completely unpredictable catastrophe that just wipes you out in an instant.
Like a pandemic or a market crash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ren Zhengfei intentionally put black swans on that lake as a daily visual reminder to his thousands of employees that disaster is always lurking.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is intense. You can take the man out of the survival situation, but you really can't take the survival instinct out of the man.
Yeah, you can't.
I mean, you have this immense wealth, a literal fortress of European luxury, but running underneath it all is this intense paranoia.
Yeah, a constant defensive posture.
Exactly.
And to understand why the founder of the world's most powerful tech company is so obsessed with catastrophic disaster, We have to rewind the clock.
Let's do it.
We have to go back way before microchips, back to 1937, and look at his father, Ren Markson.
Right. And the year 1937 in China is defined by the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which basically marked the start of the Japanese invasion.
Yeah, a very dark time.
World War II is still a couple years away for Europe, but for China, the fight for survival has already begun.
Absolutely.
And right in the middle of all this chaos, Ren Markson opens up a bookstore.
He does. He calls it the July 7th Bookstore to commemorate the start of the resistance.
Okay.
Ren Markson was a highly educated intellectual. He revered the written word at a time when, frankly, reading was a rare privilege.
Yeah, literacy wasn't universal.
No, not at all. And he stocked his shop with patriotic and revolutionary literature. We're talking writers like Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and Liu Sen.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
If he is selling Marxist literature in 1937, isn't he operating under the nationalist government?
He is.
How did he not get arrested for advertising revolutionary books?
It required incredible political maneuvering on his part.
I bet.
The nationalist officers did eventually come in, and they demanded that a huge pile of his revolutionary books not be sold.
Obviously.
But Markson was a pragmatist. He and his colleagues took all these banned books, locked them inside a glass display cabinet, and put a big sign on it that read, "Inside this cabinet are banned books."
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because that is the ultimate reverse psychology marketing.
It really is.
It is essentially the 1930s version of the Streisand effect, you know?
Exactly.
You tell the public they cannot look at something, you put it behind glass, and suddenly it is the absolute only thing anyone wants to buy. The sources actually note those books sold out almost immediately.
It just demonstrates a brilliant, highly adaptable mind.
Really smart.
Ren Markson was walking a very dangerous tightrope. To make a living, he was working as an accountant for a nationalist military factory.
Okay.
But at the exact same time, he strongly supported a truce with Mao's communists to fight the Japanese.
Playing both sides, kind of.
Yeah, he even publicly denounced factions that wanted to end that truce.
And he eventually moves to the neighboring, incredibly poor province of Guizhou, right?
Yes.
That's where he meets his wife, Meng Wanzhou. And in 1944, their son is born. They name him Ren Zhengfei.
Right.
And the name itself feels weirdly prophetic. I mean, in Chinese, Zheng means correct and Fei means not.
Yeah.
So his name ambiguously translates to right or wrong.
Which perfectly reflects the volatile reality he was born into.
How so?
Because right and wrong, politically speaking, were about to flip entirely in China.
Oh, right. 1949.
Exactly. In 1949, Mao Zedong and the communists win the Civil War.
Yep.
Suddenly, Markson, who had previously drawn a paycheck as an accountant for a nationalist factory, finds himself on the definitive wrong side of the new regime.
That is a terrifying position to be in.
It is. Surviving this new reality required extreme adaptability. He had to prove his loyalty and his utility to Mao's government immediately.
The book outlines a scene in 1950 that I think perfectly captures this new reality.
The carriage ride.
Yeah. Markson is riding in a horse-drawn carriage into the town of Zenning. The fog is so thick he can barely even see in front of him.
It's very cinematic.
And he is surrounded by 3 men armed with Mauser guns because they are genuinely afraid of being ambushed by locals in the mountains.
Yeah, it was an incredibly tense region.
The sources even mention that someone had recently threatened him with a hand grenade.
Just a completely hostile environment. And he was sent there to build a middle school.
Right.
The government's goal was to assimilate the indigenous Buyei children by teaching them Mandarin.
Okay, so a nation-building project.
Exactly. They were trying to unify these diverse, sort of self-governing regions under one language and one ideology.
Got it.
But the poverty of this area was just staggering. I mean, many families couldn't even afford the basic school fees.
So Markson institutes this policy of sheer survival.
Right.
He secures an acre of land for the school, and the students and teachers literally farm crops and raise pigs.
Just to get by.
Yeah. Just to cover the budget shortfall so they can afford basic meals and these blue uniforms for the kids.
And alongside all that farming, there was this intense ideological conditioning.
Right.
Officials told Markson he needed to clearly define who the enemies were. So he organized political rallies where students denounced local landlords and American imperialism.
And again, we're just citing the sources here neutrally.
Absolutely. The sources actually mentioned that at these rallies, students recounted these horrific stories of alleged atrocities committed by U.S. troops who had passed through the area during World War II. Yeah. The vital takeaway here is just the atmosphere of visceral resentment and intense political pressure that surrounded Ren Zhengfei's early childhood.
It sounds incredibly heavy. But the book notes that everything changes in 1958 with the Great Leap Forward.
Yes, dramatically.
I know that was a massive initiative by Mao to rapidly industrialize China and catch up to the West in steel production. But what did that actually mean on the ground for a small rural school?
It basically meant a total suspension of normal life.
Really?
Yeah. For Ren Markson's school, the government mandated halving the academic curriculum entirely.
Having it? Why?
So the staff and students could spend their nights smelting steel in makeshift backyard furnaces.
You're kidding.
No, the entire country was melting down their own farming tools, their pots, their pans, just trying to meet these impossible steel quotas.
But wait, if they melted down their farming tools, that meant no one was tending the field.
Exactly. The crops rotted.
Oh, no.
And the result was a catastrophic widespread famine.
The descriptions of this in the sources are just devastating. People's abdomens ballooning with fluid from starvation.
It's horrific.
In Guizhou province alone, it is estimated that 10% of the entire population died.
Yeah. At the school, rations were cut down to literally several tablespoons of grain per person per day. Tablespoons. They survived by growing radishes in the schoolyard and going into the woods to forage for acorns, which they would grind into a meal.
Here is the image that really stuck with me from the book.
What was it?
The starvation was so severe that Ren Markson had to order his Communist Party staff members, who were viewed as the most morally disciplined, to stand physical guard over the school's tiny pantry.
Oh, to prevent thefts?
Yes, to prevent the rest of the starving staff from stealing the food.
That is just bleak.
Meanwhile, young Ren Zhengfei is trying to study for his grueling college entrance exams in the middle of all this.
Right.
And his mother, knowing he desperately needed energy to pass these exams and hopefully escape this life, secretly slips him one extra tiny piece of corn.
It is just a staggering portrait of absolute life-or-death scarcity.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, how does a child who grows up grinding acorns into meal and watching armed guards protect a pantry of radishes go on to build a telecommunications empire that rivals Apple?
It seems impossible.
How do you get from a hand grenade threat in the Foggy Mountains to a literal replica of Versailles?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains the fundamental DNA of Huawei.
Oh, interesting.
See, business analysts in the West constantly analyze Huawei's famously ferocious wolf culture.
Right, their aggressive, relentless drive to conquer markets and crush competitors.
Exactly. But that wolf culture wasn't born in some comfortable venture-backed tech incubator in Silicon Valley.
Where failure just means you pivot and start a new app, right?
Right. It is a totally different paradigm of motivation.
Huawei's culture was born out of a literal fight against starvation.
Yes.
It was forged by a family that had to navigate shifting political crosshairs, armed threats, and actual famine.
And that historical trauma translates directly into modern corporate mechanics.
How so?
Well, Huawei's wolf culture isn't just a PR buzzword. It is an incredibly demanding structural reality.
Right.
They are famous for the 996 work schedule. That means working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week.
Wow.
And they utilize these brutal forced ranking systems where the bottom-performing employees are systematically cut.
That's intense.
Employees are even often encouraged to sign what they call striver agreements.
What are those?
It's where they voluntarily give up their paid vacation time just to prove their dedication to the company.
That is wild to me. So for Ren Zhengfei, success was never about simply getting rich or innovating for the sake of innovation.
No, not at all.
It was about survival. You don't take a day off, you don't relax because the black swan is always waiting on the lake.
Precisely. They built a corporate machine that applies that exact same life-or-death survival instinct to global capitalism.
The next time you read a headline about Huawei or 5G networks or international trade wars, remember that you aren't just looking at a story about tech hardware or data flow.
No, you're looking at history.
You are looking at the legacy of a family that learned how to survive at all costs.
Absolutely.
But that actually brings us to one final, incredibly provocative thought from the source material.
Oh, this is a great point.
There is another character in this family story that completely flips the script, and that is Ren Zhengfei's youngest daughter, Annabelle Yao.
The contrast between her life and her father's early years is just staggering.
I mean, her father was slipped an extra piece of corn to survive a famine.
Right.
Annabelle Yao grew up surrounded by those replica European castles on the Oxford campus.
A totally different universe.
She studied computer science at Harvard. In 2018, she attended Le Bal des Débutantes in Paris, which is one of the most exclusive high society events in the entire world.
Yeah.
And she did that on her way to launching a career as a pop star and actor.
She really represents the ultimate realization of the unimaginable wealth the company has generated.
She really does. But it makes you wonder.
What's that?
Well, if extreme scarcity, hand grenade threats, and black swan paranoia are what forged Huawei's relentless, world-conquering drive, what happens to the company's future?
That is the question.
Can a corporate empire built on a foundation of desperate life-or-death survival maintain its ferocious wolf culture when the next generation of leadership is born into absolute luxury?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, honestly.
Yeah.
When the hunger that built the empire is finally satisfied, what keeps the wolves hunting?
Exactly. It makes you look at that scene at the Vancouver airport completely differently.
It really does.
It wasn't just the CFO having her electronics seized in signal-blocking bags. It was the collision of two completely different worlds, two different histories, packed into one set of luggage.
Very well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, and we'll see you next time.